Welcome to our opening night at Netroots Nation and happy Hispanic Heritage Month. It's so great to have the community coming together after achieving some pretty meaningful and historic successes in 2020. Progressives working tirelessly with everything we had took back the White House.
Recording in progress.
And the Senate. Oh, wait. Thank you so much for joining us, and all the gratitude to our amazing sponsors who ensure that Netroots Nation continues to survive and thrive even through these tough times. On behalf of the board, staff, and community of Netroots Nation, I want to extend a huge thanks to all of our sponsors, especially our premier ones, who include 350.org, ACT.TV, Act Blue, Aspiration, Clarify Agency, Demand Justice, YouTube, Facebook, Daily Kos, I Am an Immigrant, and Informed Immigrant. Hi, I'm Cheryl Conti, the first Black board chair of Netroots Nation, and I'll be your host as we hear from some powerful speakers working together with you to build a brighter future as we look to recover from the devastation of COVID. Here's a little more about me. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at the Impact Seat, which is in the process of becoming an impact innovation foundation focused on building a new economy and advancing the ideas that solve the world's biggest problems. We do that through advocacy, philanthropy, and investment in diverse startup entrepreneurship. Did you know that just about all the studies show that diverse-led firms are more innovative, productive, and profitable? That's probably why the NASDAQ is now requiring all its listed companies to diversify their boards. Look it up. That matters to me because my tech startup was the first with a Black female founder on board to be acquired by a NASDAQ company in 2016. I even wrote an Amazon best-selling book intended to help other diverse entrepreneurs succeed, called Mechanical Bull: How You Can Achieve Startup Success. If you say you want ROI, you need DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. In my spare time, I'm the chair and co-founder of DoBigThings.Today, which is a progressive digital agency that focuses on providing America's leading causes, candidates, campaigns, and corporations with the new narrative and new tech needed to win in the new era in which we're living today. My most important job, however, is single mama to the world's most dangerous and adorable 5-year-old boy named Colm. I couldn't be more pumped to be with you at this, the 16th annual Netroots Nation. It's our second virtual conference. It's a priority for us to keep our community safe and strong. We are excited for an electrifying 3 days of virtual learning and connecting. Last year, over 500,000 people tuned in on average for each of our keynotes. This year, we have over 120 hours of content over 3 days with one of the most diverse lineups of speakers we've had from across our communities. That diversity includes you. This year, we're focused on some urgent themes. In this current political moment, how can we, as a movement, help make progressive policies a reality and build momentum going into 2022 and beyond? And to create the equitable, just, peaceful, and prosperous world we all envision for both people and planet, we must protect our democracy with all our might. Issues like voter protection, voting access, and court reform are central to making progress on the important issues. Tonight, you'll also hear from progressive leaders about bold, future-forward solutions on issues like immigration, climate change, and economic policy that impact everyday lives, including yours. First up tonight, we are so pleased to welcome another proud son of a single mom who knows all about the struggle too many everyday Americans face. Thank you for joining us, Democratic National Committee Chairman Jamie Harrison.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for that introduction, and thank you so much for what you do each and every day. Really, really happy and proud of you and all your achievements. And good afternoon, folks. It's so good to be with you all at this year's Netroots Nation. I want to start by saying thank you to the staff and volunteers who made this event possible, and by thanking all of you for your commitment to moving our country forward. My friends, you all are more powerful than you even know. You proved it this past year. Millions of Americans, led by young people and progressives, took to the streets in protest. You all demanded that this country live up to its original promise that all of us are created equal. You made justice and equity a priority. You demanded climate action. You insisted on leadership that delivers. Why? Because you all had hope for a better future. Hope for leadership that would fight to address the everyday needs of you, your loved ones, and people all across the country. Some folks doubted you. They said no change would come, that you wouldn't follow through. But you all acted on your hope. You took the power you built in the streets and you brought it to the ballot box. You worked hard to elect President Biden, Vice President Harris, and Democrats up and down the ballot. And most importantly, folks, you made history. Already, your hard work has paid off. We expanded the child tax credit to give working families a monthly tax cut. My friends, we already have lifted 3 million kids out of poverty, and we're projected to cut the child poverty rate in half. The bipartisan infrastructure deal is poised to make the biggest investment in clean energy transmission and electric vehicle infrastructure in the nation's history. The rest of the president's Build Back Better agenda is going to help us lower the cost of childcare and make meaningful investments in our care economy. Believe me, we're going to pass the president's Build Back Better agenda, and we're going to pay for it by asking the super wealthy and corporations to pay their fair share in taxes. My friends, none of this would have been possible without each and every one of you knocking on doors, registering voters, serving your neighbors. These may seem like little things, but they all add up to victory. And in 2020, you did all of these things and more. Forget the doubters and the skeptics. Our monumental victory in 2020 was the result of years of work by folks like you. You all have been laying the groundwork since 2016. Many of you even longer than that. In places like Georgia and Arizona, Michigan, and Wisconsin, you all made the difference. Because of your vision and planning and execution, we were able to send President Biden and Vice President Harris to the White House, win back the United States Senate, and keep our majority in the House of Representatives. And because we put Democrats in office, because we had real public servants leading the way, we've already made huge progress. So on behalf of the Democratic Party and the nation as a whole, thank you. You all were essential to everything that we've accomplished so far. And if we want to keep getting results, if we want to keep delivering bold, transformational policy for the American people, we all have to stay engaged. I know this work is hard. I know it is frustrating. Watching Republicans play political games with our health and safety, watching them turn their backs on our fundamental rights because it will score them a few more points from Tucker Carlson. Folks, it pisses me off. Seeing Mitch McConnell throw around empty platitudes about my friend Congressman John Lewis, when at the same time, he's dishonoring the man's legacy by blocking voting rights legislation. It makes my blood boil. I'm sure many of you feel the same way. Whether it's voting rights, climate change, reproductive freedom, or any number of issues, you're fed up with a disregard for others, with the GOP's failure to actually do anything of substance for you and your family and your communities. But here's the thing, folks. We can hit these clowns where it hurts, at the ballot box. If you've had your fill of Republican senators doing too much talking and not enough legislating, a whole bunch of them are vulnerable in 2022. We have the power to show them the door and give the president more votes to advance his bold agenda. If you're angry that Greg Abbott thinks he can get away with denying the constitutional rights of women, guess what? He's up for re-election. If you heard enough anti-science nonsense from Ron DeSantis, let's hold him accountable because he's up in 22. Because if we don't act, if we sit on the sidelines, if we say, woe is me, we'll end up with Speaker McCarthy and Leader McConnell. This country can't afford that, my friends. We've worked too hard and come too far to go backwards right now. When we work together, when the progressive movement engages with the Democratic Party, we accomplish big things. We saw it in Georgia. I'm not asking you to paper over your differences or squash debate. I'm asking all of us to unite around our shared values, our shared belief that elected officials are first and foremost public servants, that their chief concern should always be how they can deliver for their communities. Because if we do that, we can send a powerful message all across the country in 2022. We can remind folks that public service, elected office, it's not about red states and blue states, red counties or blue counties. It's about which leaders care about you and which leaders care about the photo op. It's about which leaders are showing up in your communities every day and which leaders only remember your block come election day. It's about which leaders are fighting to deliver for you and your loved ones and which leaders are only fighting to stay politically relevant. Democrats are working every day to be there for you. This D behind me doesn't only stand for Democrats, it stands for delivers. Folks, we are the brick wall between chaos and hope, and we cannot falter. So I want to thank you all again for having me today. One thing I love to leave folks with, our motto in South Carolina is, while I breathe, I hope, but our motto as a party, our motto as activists has to be, while I breathe, I vote. Because my friends, that is how we bring hope to your community, to your neighborhood, to your state, back to this great nation of ours. Again, it's an honor to be in this fight with each and every one of you. Thank you all so much for having me today.
Thank you so much for that inspiring message of hope and urgency, DNC Chairman Harrison. Now, let's hear from some of our top leaders in the immigration reform movement. First up, we have a powerful monologue from Tanya Titus, an undocumented immigrant who is the founder and CEO of Convivir, Colorado, and the National Outreach and Education Director at the Modus Theater, where she is featured in the Undocu America project. After she knocks your socks off, Representative Joe Neguse of Colorado will join Marissa Molina, who is the Colorado State Director of Forward.us, for an enlightening conversation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I am Tanya Titus, queer educator, organizer, and undocumented immigrant with the privilege of DACA. I'm the founder of Convivir, where I work with young people, young immigrants and refugees, and I'm here to highlight just the level of urgency. The moment is now. So I'm excited to share with you my autobiographical monologue developed in a Modus monologue workshop for the Modus Undocu America project, titled Listen to Your Heart. I often hear that the only way to get people to care about my struggles as an undocumented woman is to ask them to imagine me as their daughter or sister. But I have my own family, and my mere humanity deserves respect. I was taught at school in this country that my contributions to society are all that should matter. So I've done everything in my power to be at the top of my class, get into a good college, volunteer, work hard, pay taxes to prove that I'm worthy. And I am worthy, with or without all that effort, even though I often get treated quite literally like an alien or criminal, simply because I don't have an official document calling me a citizen. I also want you to know that I am proud of my Mexican identity, although it took almost 2 decades for me to embrace. From ages 5 to 18, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, a place where an anti-immigrant sheriff named Joe Arpaio ruled. He put undocumented Mexican immigrants in chain gang shackles, making the men wear pink underwear to humiliate them. He literally celebrated spending less money on his inmates than on his dog. And this was somehow acceptable. I grew up constantly striving to prove that I wasn't dirty, lazy, criminal, or shameful, that I wasn't worth less than a dog. I now finally have a sense of my own value. So to feel my life under attack and have most people do nothing in response, it's as if my humanity doesn't matter. And that baffles me. It's inconceivable that the very ground under my feet is falling away and I could be deported, put into a detention center, separated from my family, my neighbors, lose my job, my mortgage, and all I've built. And yet somehow you, my friends, people at the coffee shop, the grocery store, maybe you listening to my story right now, don't see my situation as urgent enough to get up and do something about it. My entire community of documented and undocumented people is under attack everywhere, left and right, day after day. And it seems most people think they've done their job simply by liking my article on Facebook. Sad crying face, maybe even angry face. People think they've done enough by staying caught up on the news so they have something to lament at the dinner table. My life is not a talking point. My life is not something to uplift a liberal agenda. And don't you dare pity me or send me your prayers. Do something. Call your senator or your immigrant-phobic family. Show up at an immigrant rights meeting. Because every day of inaction is another day the status quo prevails. And the status quo is painful, even if I still have my family intact. Because it hurts, physically, emotionally, mentally, that most citizens don't care enough to give their time and effort to help me and their fellow human beings. Because while you're going about business as usual, trying to keep up with work deadlines, health goals, and reflecting on your next gratitude post, those of us on the front lines of anti-immigrant attacks are fighting against the limited hours in a day. Because there's never enough time to work our 60-hour-a-week jobs and then go to meeting after meeting, plan events, protests, fundraisers, and teach-ins, pouring our energy from what quickly becomes an empty cup. But somehow, at the same time, it's still the job of the undocumented community to educate citizens on how our life depends on your voice, your vote, your money, and your willingness to show up. It's not like we enjoy the fact that we need you, but we do. And I'm exhausted from pulling your weight and begging you to act like a citizen in a democracy. And because most people aren't pulling their weight, my mental health is suffering. I need rest too. But right now, I'm afraid that if I don't go to that extra meeting, if I don't share that petition, if I don't convince everyone that this is urgent, then more people will get deported, sometimes sent to their death, and another family will be torn apart. You see, it's urgent for us all the time. In some place, deep inside, you must know it's urgent too. You must. So please, just for a moment, pause, breathe. Can you hear my words? I am afraid. I am afraid that in the end, no matter how much I've fought for others, I won't be able to save my own family from deportation. Have you seen the pictures from our borders? Innocent families with young children and elders, tear gassed, whipped for seeking refuge. Do you know what is happening across our country? Hard-working immigrants, good parents just like mine, locked away like criminals in detention centers. Young children separated from their parents in these terrible tent camps are exposed to abuse and dying from dehydration and untreated infections. Do you see a war? Do you see at least a semblance to concentration camps? Can you feel your own heart telling you it is urgent? It is urgent. Justice requires we take action. A pathway to citizenship and support to families seeking refuge. Please listen to your heart, not just for me or for the undocumented community, but for your own humanity too. Please, it's urgent. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much, Tanya Titus, for that really emotional and powerful speech. Joining us now is Molina, who is the Colorado State Director of Forward.us. Marissa, please join us and inspire us around immigration.
Thank you so much for having me, Cheryl. And thank you so much to all of you who are joining us virtually today. I am thrilled to have the opportunity to be in conversation with Representative Joe Neguse, who's been an incredible fighter for the immigrant community in Colorado since his first term in Congress. And I just want to say before I get to share a little bit more about him, a big thank you to Tanya, who I've had the pleasure of knowing in our education circles. Both Tanya and I have been our former teachers, and knowing the way in which Tanya has set the stage for many advocates like me to follow in her footsteps, I feel super honored to have the opportunity to follow after Tanya. I've had the opportunity of getting to know Representative Neguse in my work advocating for the rights of DACA recipients, undocumented people, and all immigrants in Colorado. In that time, I have learned that we share a love for the great state of Colorado, its people, and that we both deeply believe in the promise of the American dream. As a child of immigrants himself, Representative Neguse knows firsthand what is possible when we welcome refugees and immigrants with dignity. It is for those reasons that I, someone who grew up undocumented, is able to stand before you today. And it is one of the reasons why I'm in this fight for immigrant rights. I will never forget watching Representative Joe Neguse deliver a passionate speech in support of HR 6, the American Dream and Promise Act. I watched proudly, knowing that a member of Congress from my state was committed to fighting for people like me and millions of other immigrant families. And that commitment has never been more important. We have a once-in-a-decade opportunity to finally provide relief to millions of undocumented people who contribute every single day to making this country better and stronger and keeping millions of American families safe and together. After 4 years living under constant threat from the Trump administration, as we heard from Tanya, we know exactly what is at stake. We know that DACA continues to be under threat in the courts and that thousands of young people continue to live in limbo and under fear that their lives and their families will be ripped away from them. And that is why I'm so excited to be in conversation with Representative Neguse to discuss how we can deliver on this promise for millions of immigrants in our country and those seeking refuge and safety at our southern border. Representative Neguse, thank you so much for joining me for this important conversation.
Well, thank you, Marissa. What an incredibly kind introduction. I very much appreciate it. And it's a pleasure and a privilege and an honor to be able to join you and to be able to join Netroots Nation again. I always enjoy being a part of Netroots Nation. And I must say, this year in particular, a special privilege to join the virtual stage, if you will, with someone as distinguished as Marissa, whose story has inspired so many people, not just in my state of Colorado, but really people across the country. And it has been wonderful to be able to work with you on one of the most consequential challenges that we face as a country, which is, of course, the desperate need for us to finally make immigration reform a reality. And very grateful for the opportunity to talk about that today.
Yeah, and so let's jump right in. Thank you, Representative Neguse. Members of Congress, including yourself, have committed to securing relief and robust protections for immigrants this year, including millions of those who continue to serve in essential frontline jobs in the recovery of the pandemic. So while we know that the first bird bath with the Senate parliamentarian has fallen short of our ideal policy goal, it is our understanding that Senate leadership is working on additional proposals. I know you sit on the Judiciary Committee, so can you tell us a little bit more about this path forward? And why is it important that protections for immigrants emerge as part of the budget reconciliation process?
Sure. Well, first, let me just say, taking a step back, I think it's important for us to recognize where we are and the steps necessary for us to ultimately get this across the finish line. As you know, and as you alluded to, Marissa, just a few weeks ago, the House Judiciary Committee, and a committee that I serve on, I serve as the vice chair of the Immigration Subcommittee, we marked up our portion of the president's Build Back Better bill, the reconciliation bill, which included immigration. And as you know, the portion of our bill that we marked up was transformational. It would ultimately mean, were it to be signed into law by President Biden, that 8 million individuals would be able to obtain lawful permanent resident status, that roughly 6.7 million essential workers, including more than 1 million Dreamers, 300,000 folks who are in the TPS and DED programs, and 750,000 individuals in non-immigrant status would have a pathway as well. Just incredibly meaningful steps that we have been working on, literally, as you know, Marissa, for decades. So the fact that that made it out of the Judiciary Committee and that there is a sufficient majority in the House, I believe, that is supportive of these principles is a huge deal. And I would be remiss if I didn't say a big thank you with a very heavy heart to every single person on today's call who for the last several years, in some cases decades, have been beating the drum, making clear that these changes needed to happen because it is because of your work and your activism and lifting your voice in support of the voiceless that we are where we are today. Now, as you mentioned, Marissa, without getting into the technical details regarding the bird rule and the bird bath and all that is involved with trying to get a bill through the United States Senate reconciliation process, which is fairly archaic and convoluted and complex, suffice to say, as you said, that there are big hurdles and that our first attempt to have this plan approved in effect or ruled in order by the parliamentarian did not go as we had hoped. And so my understanding is that there are a group of senators, chiefly among them Senator Durbin, who of course is the whip in the United States Senate and a champion for immigration reform and the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, along with Senator, a number of different senators, I should say. I don't want to just select just one or two, but a number of different senators that are working with Senator Durbin on what has been described as an option B or plan B around trying to make the case that essentially the reforms that we're discussing today would have a significant budgetary impact, which of course they surely would, and that ultimately they should be ruled in order for the reconciliation process. Senator Padilla, I might add, again, not to identify specific senators, but he has been an incredible partner. We've worked with his office, of course, the newest senator from the state of California on this issue as well. And he, like me, has a very visceral connection to immigration. I, as you know, being the son of immigrants. And in any event, suffice to say that I think we are on a good path. I think that the parliamentarians' ruling with respect to the plan that ultimately passed out of the Judiciary Committee, I thought that ruling was just not a cogent ruling. It doesn't make sense to me how she could conclude or reach the conclusion that she did. But again, I think we've got to have faith that we're going to pull this off. And we're, at the end of the day, there are a number of us in the House that have made very clear that it is a top priority and that we have to get this done. If not now, when? So we intend to keep pushing.
Well, thank you, Representative Neguse. I think that incredible commitment, and I spoke about this earlier, it's a commitment that I feel like binds your work and my work together, that we are committed to seeing relief for families, for our immigrant communities who have suffered for far too long without any real solution. So I appreciate that commitment that you continue to show in your leadership in those conversations. You know, at the same time that we're fighting for these protections for folks who have been in our country for many years, we are also, have for the last, couple of weeks been horrified by the racist violence perpetrated against Black Haitian immigrants at our southern border and the targeting overall of Black migrants more broadly. And I know you joined the Black Caucus in standing up and fighting against those actions that we all saw. Can you speak a little bit more about that letter and how, we can, as a country, continue to welcome people who are seeking safety with dignity, the same way that maybe your family and my family had the privilege to be welcomed?
Marissa, I've always believed that America is at its best when we are a beacon of hope and of liberty to folks across the globe, right? And when we are in a position to welcome those who are fleeing persecution and violence and unthinkable carnage and just incredibly dangerous circumstances. And as you said, my parents were refugees who came to this wonderful country 40 years ago, and we've been able to live the American dream by virtue of the freedoms and the opportunities that we have here in the United States that don't exist in a lot of places in the world. And so, of course, as you can imagine, as a son of Black immigrants to this country, to see what was happening on our southern border and the way in which Haitians who are, again, fleeing unimaginable anguish and violence and very troubling circumstances, obviously, in their native country, to see them treated in that way, I just think it clearly was not consistent with our values as Americans, nor consistent with what I think America is and must be. And so we, as you said, in the Black Caucus, a number of us on the executive committee led on a letter to the president and to Secretary Mayorkas to implore him to take the necessary steps to ensure that that type of treatment never happens again against any immigrant, right? And ultimately understanding that we have to do everything we can to preserve and secure folks' fundamental dignity. And clearly that was not the case. I also would just say, when we talk about DED and TPS programs, of course, you're well aware of these, and I'm sure many of our guests are today, or folks at Netroots Nation, but it's important to remember that those programs also extend and should extend to African countries. We, myself and Representative Omar, just led a letter to Secretary Mayorkas asking him to declare TPS status for Mauritania, for Cameroon, and for Ethiopia, each country experiencing, again, very intense conflict that is displacing upwards of hundreds of thousands of people. So in my view, again, America is a rich melting pot, right? And we, even the panelists today, right, reflect kind of the rich diversity of our country. And when we think about immigration and the immigrants that make America what it is, they come from all over the world, including African countries in Central America, South America, Europe, Asia. And so it's important for us to recognize that holistically.
Yeah, and that's so important, Representative Neguse. As I tell people, I wouldn't be here today if the American dream wasn't still possible. And I really mean that, because, I grew up undocumented in rural Colorado before DACA, before in-state tuition in the state of Colorado. And somehow, because some really wonderful people along the way, including my high school counselor and some folks at Fort Lewis College, they guided me, they believed in me, and they created a pathway for me. And that inspired in me the work that I do today, my work as a teacher, because I wanted to make sure that that American dream continues to live on. And I think it really is upon every single one of us. And I really hope that folks hear that from what we're talking about in this conversation, from what they heard from Tanya, that it is within each one of us to keep that dream possible for people, that we continue to give access to those types of opportunities to more folks who are seeking a better life in our country. Representative Neguse, we have talked about this question before together. the relief we're seeking this year is incredibly important, and there's a lot at stake. But when we think about the big spectrum of what it means to fix our broken immigration system, this is only just a small part of that. And we really need to be able to get back at some point to be able to discuss like comprehensive immigration reform that really tackles our broken immigration system from all the different angles. What do you think it's going to take for us to get back to that place?
Well, the most frustrating part for me, Marissa, and I suspect that this is the case for many Americans, is that I don't know that the solutions are all that complicated, right? I mean, there was a time not that long ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, where there was general consensus about the principles that would undergird a comprehensive immigration reform bill in the United States Congress, right? And as you said, it didn't just include, of course, protections for dreamers and the pathway to citizenship that we are now fighting for, but also reforms to our asylum laws, right, and our refugee resettlement processes, reforms to the J1 and H1B and H2B programs, really all inclusive, right? It has been quite a while, literally almost 40 years since we have had comprehensive immigration reform at the federal level. And of course, the result is now a patchwork of regulatory steps that different administrations have taken that have created a system that is incredibly inefficient and I think a system that does not honor, again, our commitment to being that beacon of hope and liberty and ultimately the benefits that immigrants bring to our country. And so to me, it's not so much that we're in need of solutions or policy proposals, although those are always welcome. What we're really in need of is political will. And that's it. I mean, the reality is what has changed from 2006 when Senator Kennedy and Senator McCain worked on their immigration bill with President Bush to 2013 when the Gang of Eight worked on their bill with President Obama. And again, whether folks like either of those bills or dislike those bills, the general contours, right, were very clear. What has changed from then to today is we now unfortunately have political figures that use immigration to demonize and dehumanize and I think create a political issue in order to win elections. And that's fundamentally what has changed. The solutions have not changed. The policy prescriptions really have not changed. But unfortunately, absent political will, it's tough to see a pathway to getting it done. I'm certainly going to keep on fighting for it. It's why I asked to serve on the Judiciary Committee and the Immigration Subcommittee. But I would be lying to you if I didn't say that the biggest impediment, the lack of political will on the part of our policymakers in Washington, is not still the biggest impediment, which I think it is.
Thank you for your honesty in that question. I think it is so important for us to hear that because it's a good reminder that we don't just need bold action from Congress. We need bold action from everyone who is joining us and who's part of Netroots Nation. We need to make sure that folks are engaged, that we continue to ask our representatives to deliver on these solutions because the time to do so is now. And Representative Neguse, thank you again so much for your leadership, for the work you continue to do to make sure that we are fighting tirelessly for immigrant community because you and I both deeply believe, I think, even after the Senate parliamentarian ruling, that this is our year and that this is the year that we deliver a solution for millions of immigrant families who continue to wait. So thank you for your leadership. Thanks for being with us today. And I encourage everyone who had the opportunity to hear us today, to hear from Tanya, to take bold action because this has to be our year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure. And to everyone who's watching, I would say, if I have one piece of advice, is to be more like Marissa. She, as some of you may know, I don't know that she disclosed this, but she serves on a board of directors, essentially, board of trustees for Metro State University. It's a position that I held, similar position when I was on the Board of Regents before I was in Congress. And the fact that she stepped up and has stepped up in so many ways to serve her community and her state, notwithstanding the incredible hurdles and obstacles that she faced, I think we can draw a lot of inspiration from that. And so I'm hopeful that others who are listening today will do the same and look for those opportunities to step up, and hopefully we'll see Marissa in Congress one day soon. So thanks everybody for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Representative Neguse and Marissa Molina. And I agree with the representative. We should all aspire to be more like Marissa. Switching gears, I don't know if you've noticed, but the ongoing COVID crisis has revealed an awful lot about how our economy works and doesn't work for many Americans. Recovery requires a complete rethink of how our economy can succeed for more people in the 21st century. And that means fighting for bold, innovative policies, both federally and in our states. Now, you're going to hear from two speakers who are working to make a difference on urgent issues around economic policy and climate change. Aspiration co-founder Joe Sandberg and Wisconsin Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. Please welcome first, Joe Sandberg.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Thank you, Netroots Nation. We live in a cheating economy. It's a cheating economy that's built on the twin pillars of fear and corruption. I want to tell you a story about an experience I've had just in the past week that has illuminated the consequences of this cheating economy. I grew up in Orange County, California. My mom raised me by herself. We didn't have a lot when I was growing up, but one of the things we always loved was going to the public beaches. And as you've seen on TV, the Syrian images, we are facing an ecological disaster in Southern California that is unlike any we've seen in 30 years because of a major oil spill off of the coast of Orange County. Here in California, the state that's perceived as this beacon of progressivism, 9,014 oil and gas permits have been approved during the term of Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom. And it's forced me to reflect again on why is it that in the place that's supposed to be the beacon of progressivism, in the place where I grew up, the public beaches that are home to so many people that don't have anything else they can afford to do, muddied by oil and fossil fuel. And it fundamentally is because we have a cheating economy built on fear and corruption. And that cheating economy is protected by a wall that I call the "it's too expensive" wall. For 30 years, since I was a kid in my early teens, I'm 42 now, we all have heard time and again, it's too expensive and we can't afford it. But what COVID has revealed is how that's always been a lie. COVID has reminded us that we could afford trillions of dollars for a war that was based on a lie. COVID has reminded us that when Wall Street needed a multi-trillion-dollar bailout, we didn't think twice. And COVID again showed us that when big corporations needed trillions of dollars, we didn't think twice. But whenever it comes to a matter of confronting crisis that is central to living with human dignity, the climate crisis, the poverty crisis, we're always told we can't afford it. And that's a lie told by people who are paid off by industries that make money, keeping us on the wrong side of this wall called too expensive. On the other side of this wall called too expensive are pharmaceutical companies that donate to Senator Kyrsten Sinema, are the oil and gas companies that donate to Senator Manchin, and are the insurance companies like Blue Shield that donate to Governor Gavin Newsom. The builders of this wall that I call the too expensive wall are often portrayed as the other in the far right of the Republican Party. But the reality is the so-called experts who have told us these lies now for decades exist in both political parties and outside both political parties. When we wonder why we can't have aggressive climate action, when we wonder why we can't raise the minimum wage, when we wonder why we can't be serious about tackling the poverty crisis, you don't need a PhD in political science to know the answer. Just follow the money. Just follow the money to our cheating economy that works like this. In our cheating economy, businesses are rewarded for the longer they break the rules in ways that they can't be caught. Because by the time that they are caught for breaking the rules or lying, they become so big and have so much market power that the fines that regulators impose on them for cheating are just puny compared to the balance sheets that they've accumulated. They laugh at us all the way to the bank, while for decades they cheat and lie their way to market power. Now, you don't need a PhD in economics to know these companies. They're the fossil fuel companies that for decades lied to us about the risks that their industry poses to the climate crisis. They're the health insurance companies that continue to stand between us and single-payer health insurance, even in a progressive state like California. They are the oil companies and the utility companies like PG&E who sprinkle money all around state capitals, including in my home of California, so we don't have a real Green New Deal. And right now, they are holding hostage the progressive agenda that we worked hard to elect in 2020. The reason that we don't have a $15 minimum wage, the reason that we're looking at a massive cut to this aggressive bill, which should have been 10 trillion and is heading down to 1.5 trillion or less, is because of the businesses that are economically interested in keeping us behind this wall of it's too expensive. But here's the problem. If we don't break down this wall of it's too expensive, the next 30 years are going to contain crises that are even worse than the last 30. Looking back, the lie of it's too expensive, the illusion that we can't question the so-called experts has sent us in to wars, to economic crisis, and has kept us away from the progressive future that actually the majority wants. If we don't break down that wall of it's too expensive, what we're going to face in the next 30 years is a democracy that is a memory, a planet that is no longer inhabitable. To conclude, I want to add some insights that can bring directly from the private sector that I hope will encourage you to keep fighting against this wall of it's too expensive, this wall that's based on a lie. Industry that buys these politicians tell us that if we do something like cancel student debt, we'll create a generation of people that are lazy. But I can tell you from my firsthand experience in business that when you cancel debt, you unlock an explosion of consumption that stimulates economic growth and better paying jobs. These industries that buy our politicians will tell you that if we have a higher minimum wage, we'll have $30 hamburgers. But I can tell you as a co-founder of a business that itself has raised our minimum wage to $25. When you pay people a living wage, you don't have $30 hamburgers. You have people who can afford life's basic needs. And in conclusion, they tell us that we can't afford to be serious about the climate crisis. They tell us that the companies that are going to save the day are the same fossil fuel companies that have gotten us into this crisis. If it weren't so tragic, it would be funny that they're telling us to trust the oil companies that have put us on the brink of extinction with the moral charge of defeating the climate crisis. But of all those crises, most of all, we can't afford not to act. Right now, it's the coast of where I grew up in Orange County. Tomorrow, it'll be on your doorstep. Climate catastrophe is all around us. We have to do everything we can in our own lives to take action, but we can't defeat the climate crisis without big, bold government action. And we can't get that big, bold government action until we tear down that wall called it's too expensive that surrounds and protects this cheating economy that's built on fear and corruption. And so in closing, I ask you, I urge you, break down that wall.
Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. And Joe, just to piggyback on your closing, when they say it's too expensive, I'll tell you what's too expensive is these campaigns. There's way too much money in politics, and that's why we don't get the results that we deserve as the American people. And that's why I decided to run for lieutenant governor. Same reason I ran for state representative in 2012. And before Elizabeth Warren told us to dream big and fight hard in the 2020 presidential cycle, there was a woman named Val Phillips here in the state of Wisconsin who told us to dream big dreams. And with the common theme of dreams, we all have to remember that we should not be afraid to dare to dream. And there are too many people who come up in communities like the one that I was born in, right in the heart of the city of Milwaukee, where I was born in the 53206 zip code, which unfortunately is our state's most impoverished. It's one of our nation's most incarcerated zip codes. And the children that grow up in communities just like that went all across the country, they aren't told to dream big dreams. They aren't told to dream big or fight hard. Unfortunately, there is no one to tell them to dare to dream, but that's what we have to change. That's why we're here today. And that's why I stepped up to run for office, to reach for what can be and never settling for what we've been given. Because over the course of this pandemic, we've seen an already historic level of inequality explode beyond historic proportions. And now we're left with a society where the sick still continue to get sicker. Our children still suffer from an educational divide where broadband isn't always accessible or affordable. But meanwhile, the wealthiest in our society have continued to get richer, amassing a sum of wealth that many can't even imagine. That's not how things should be. And that's why we have to continue to fight and push for better policies, a better society. That doesn't happen with the status quo. It doesn't happen when we keep electing the same people to office. It doesn't happen when we have a U.S. Senate that is totally unrepresentative of the American public. And we have an opportunity to change that with elections all across the country. We have an opportunity to change that with organizing efforts all across the country. And some of the unfortunate realities that continue to exist with us having to continue to struggle and strive and fight for a $15 minimum wage, we organized for that back in 2014. That was 7 years ago. And for that to not be the reality is something that should not sit well with any of us. But the idea that we find ourselves, unfortunately, in the depths of despair, whether it's the inequality, whether it is the pandemic, whether it is the multiple crises we face, not limited to the ones I mentioned, or the climate crisis, it should energize us. It should challenge us to do more. I stepped up and ran for state representative at the age of 25 because of my work as an organizer in the interfaith space, where we organize around issues of jobs and economic development, education, immigration reform, and treatment instead of prison. I ran for lieutenant governor with those same ideals in mind, knowing that this state could be so much better, knowing that the state of Wisconsin, unfortunately, is first at being worst in so many aspects of life. We are the number one incarcerator of Black males, twice the national average. We have the highest income gaps among racial lines. But those are things that we had to be dedicated to changing. And sitting by on the sidelines is never an option because things can get worse. And I'm running for the U.S. Senate now because I know that if we don't get off the sidelines, things could get worse. The Senate, as it stands right now with this 50-50 majority, where I have to use air quotes, is not delivering for the American people. There's no reason we should be stalling over the reconciliation bill or the infrastructure package or Build Back Better. If we're truly to have a majority, we should come to expect these things. And I feel as if the $3.5 trillion price tag is the compromise. But unfortunately, there are too many people who are there, who occupy that body, who don't understand. We know that we cannot return to normal. Normal wasn't working. Normal wasn't good enough. Normal left way too many people behind. And that's why we have to continue to fight to tackle inequality in every form. We need to realize the dream of economic justice. We need to realize the idea of environmental justice. We need to realize the idea that healthcare should be available to every person in this country, and a just and fair immigration system is not a radical idea. It's what we should come to expect. And we know that it's past time that we took action on all of these issues and so many more, but it takes us getting out of our comfort zones. And it also takes us getting other people out of their comfort zones. And coming from a state like Wisconsin, A lot of people will say, well, how do these progressive ideas win? I'm here to tell you that progressive ideas are how we win the day in the state of Wisconsin. We have a bold tradition, and I talked a lot about some of the negative things that are happening here, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about our legacy and being a progressive leader. We were the very first state to ratify the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. We were the very first state to declare the Fugitive Slave Act unconstitutional. We were the very first state to have anti-discrimination laws based on sexual orientation on the books. We've done bold things before, and it's time for us to do bold things again. I know that you believe. That's why you're here. I believe. That's why I stepped up to run for office. I believe in a more fair America that delivers opportunity to every child, regardless of their zip code. Any person here should have a shot at what we thought was the American dream. Unfortunately, that dream is too far out of reach for too many people. However, government has been working for some people. We see the wealthiest among us continue to amass sums of wealth, again, that some of us can never imagine. But in order for us to get to that place, we all have to step up. And I encourage people to run for office, seek out local office, seek out state level office, and even seek out federal office. These seats shouldn't just be reserved for the wealthy and well-connected. We should have a government that truly reflects the American experience. That American experience is diverse, but in a body like the US Senate, the real experience of people in this country who've had to struggle, who oftentimes didn't know where their next meal was going to come from, didn't know where the next paycheck is going to come from. Those aren't the people who get to make the choices. It's time that we change that. It's time that we bring real world and real life into Congress, into our governing institutions, so that everybody in this country can enjoy the opportunity that they deserve. And so with that being said, we have to fight for economic justice, which includes raising the minimum wage and paid leave for families, a fair and just immigration reform, fair treatment regardless of where you were born, how you're born, who you love. We have to invest more in our schools than we do in our prison system. We have to fight climate change with everything that we absolutely have, because we only get one planet. Unfortunately, people have put profit in the way of reality and quality of life, disregarding the most vulnerable citizens. We know who feels the impact of climate change the most. And almost most importantly, I'm not always sure how to gauge these, but our democracy is quite literally on the line, not just with this election cycle, but with every election cycle. Every election is the most important election, whether it's for a school board member or whether it's for the president of the United States. And I'm here to tell you that the radical, out of control right wing is hell-bent on destroying our democracy. They're hell-bent on hijacking our democracy. And they're only doing that because their outdated ideas, their vision of America that existed prior to 1865 is withering away. The United States is changing, it's growing more diverse. There are more perspectives. There are more people who are demanding a seat at the table. We are the people who are demanding a seat at the table. And we can't rest until we get the change that we deserve. It's going to take each and every one of us. There's nothing that any of us can do on our own. So when we join together in coalition, I hope people remember that it's about building community, because community is what lasts. People arm in arm, different races, different backgrounds, different genders, sexual identities, whatever the case may be. All the stuff that they told you would keep you back are the things that should give us power, and the things that should give us hope for a brighter tomorrow. So I'm really excited to be here. I truly wish we could have been doing this in person, but until that point, we'll organize here over Zoom. We'll do it wherever we have to until we begin to take over and make sure that all of our institutions are reflective of the people that they are supposed to serve. So with that being said, just want to thank you so much for having me. Onward, forward is the motto of the state of Wisconsin. We are going to lead this nation into a new era. So for those who've gotten downtrodden, for those who are despondent, know that better is possible, but only if we do the hard work to make it happen.
Onward, forward, better is possible. Thank you so much to Joe Sandberg and Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. We just heard about what's happening on the state level in Wisconsin from Lieutenant Governor Barnes. Now, let's have a candid conversation with one of our progressive champions in Congress, who is making sure the reforms our families and communities need come to fruition. Please welcome card-carrying member of the squad that keeps white supremacists and neo-fascists up at night. It's Representative Rashida Tlaib of Detroit, Michigan, who has generously agreed to have a fireside chat with us. Representative Tlaib, what is the current congressional landscape of legislation from your standpoint?
Hello, Netroots Nation. It's Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. Thank you so much for allowing me to share space with all of you. I know we want to talk about the congressional landscape of the current Build Back Better plan, which is $3.5 trillion investment in people. I always say we have to focus not only on the roads and the things that are outside of our homes, but things that are inside of our homes. So care economy, making sure that the water coming through our homes are clean without, fully, completely free from lead, and so much more. I know the White House continues to talk to Senators Manchin and Sinema to find out exactly what their asks and demands are. Of course, the Progressive Caucus continues to be very much engaged, connected to movement organizations, our labor partners, and so many more folks that want to make sure that this is meaningful investment for everyone across the nation, not just for some. I know that many of my progressive colleagues and I have vowed to hold the line, and we continue to do that. I know for me, I've been very much about bringing those human stories from home that talk about the need for childcare, the home care-based programs, and so much more. I know for many of the environmental justice groups and myself as well, we want to make sure that we are saving our earth, again, with meaningful investment in climate. So we're going to hold the line. And thanks to all of you and the incredible work that you're doing, you're helping us give credibility to what we're saying so that it's not just numbers and various strategies that folks want to focus on, but that it is about the real impact that we're going to have on people's lives. So from housing as an infrastructure to child tax credit becoming permanent, to replacing every single lead contaminated pipeline across our nation, to making sure that immigrants, our neighbors, our immigrant neighbors are included in that investment. So just know, again, we're going to hold the line because many of you are demanding us to. So continue to be bold in that sense.
Thanks. How are you and other members of the Progressive Caucus pushing for progressive policy solutions to issues like climate change, immigration, education, economic policy, and more?
I know for myself, in regards to what is critically important as we think about the People's Infrastructure Bill, as we think about building back better, I represent the third poorest congressional district in the country. So right now, it's getting Build Back Better Act passed with the key priorities for my neighbors from, making sure that we have access to home repair, making sure that we are preventing continuation of flooding of many of our homes. So making sure we have climate resiliency as well as addressing climate crisis directly, making sure that we're addressing the expansion and need to expand healthcare coverage around hearing, around vision, and around dental. And, so much more. I know that much of my communities, especially my immigrant communities, want to make sure that they're not left out. And I know the Progressive Caucus continues to demand that immigration, investment in immigration, that there be a pathway. Investment in that pathway is included in the reconciliation, or again, what I call the People's Infrastructure. You should all know that Michigan has a serious lack of affordable housing. We lost more Black home ownership in Michigan than any other state in the country. And so we got to make sure that, again, we're taking care of people inside their homes, not just thinking about brick and mortar and what's outside of the home. And you all know I am demanding that water is a human right. And that means making sure that water is clean. Too many of the schools in my district have shut down their water fountains with literally garbage bags over them. I always believe that, a child deserves human dignity as they try to access education. But the fact that water is life, that for us not to access clean water and not for us as a federal government to be investing it in a very meaningful way, I think would be a huge loss as we move forward with Build Back Better.
How can the progressive movement help put pressure on the moderate members of Congress, Senate Manchin, to pass these bills that are being discussed?
One of the things that the progressive movement can help in making sure that we put the pressure on many colleagues that may still be disconnected with the pain on the ground and with the sense of urgency. I think the movement work that you all are part of move with that sense of urgency that is lacking in Congress. So many of my colleagues don't fully understand what it means to be underinsured or uninsured. Many don't understand what it means to send their child to a school without clean drinking water, or a school that doesn't have the resources it needs to making sure that that education is not just there, but it's quality education. It's education that has equitable funding. And so for all of you, you need to bring those real life human stories. So many do not understand what it felt like during the pandemic as a frontline worker not to have access to childcare. Many didn't understand what it felt like to live with pre-existing conditions because of environmental racism, because corporate polluters are literally around Black and brown communities. And we have to address climate, and we have to stop the investment in the fossil fuel industry. You all bring those real life stories and those truths that sometimes is lacking, or in many ways buried underneath a lot of the rhetoric of DC language that, again, is so disconnected with the pain on the ground.
Got it. Right now, Representative Tlaib, we are seeing an all-out attack on voting rights in this country. How is protecting voting rights critical to progressive priorities like environmental justice and reproductive justice?
So I think it's really important that not only are we talking about meaningful investment into our communities with reconciliation, or what I call the people's infrastructure, I think as you all are gathering today as Netroots Nation, that we are talking also about the historic and unbelievable attack on voting rights in our country. And how is protecting voting rights important to the progressive priorities like environmental justice or reproductive justice? We all know if we don't fight to ensure equitable access to the ballot box for people like us, our fight to end economic and social inequality will be tremendous. It will be harder for our movement. It's no coincidence that many of our Black neighborhoods waited in line at the polls 29% longer than those residing in our white neighborhoods. It's no coincidence that at a time when minority Americans are on track to become the majority, that white folks are attempting, especially those that are elected, are attempting to cling to the power by trying to rob them of the right to vote. There is no question that the recent judicial decision to rescind major parts of the Voting Rights Act made racial economic inequality worse. We got to break the vicious cycle and stand up for every single person's right to vote in this country. Not only that, we should expand on them in every way we can. That's why I introduced legislation that prevents states from barring formerly incarcerated individuals from voting due to debts owed through criminal justice system. In the year 2021, we should not have anything that even remotely resembles a poll tax, keeping largely people of color from voting. So I hope you all stand with me in making sure that we connect these movements together, and understanding there are folks that want to close the door of having us to have a seat at the table, but more importantly, having our voices at all levels of government.
Thank you so much, Representative Tlaib, for being with us tonight. Fun fact, the average age of the squad in Congress is 2 decades younger than the average House member. So let's hear it for a new generation pulling us into the future. Represent. Okay, finally, we are going to close out our opening plenary with a special conversation on climate change and environmental justice with Secretary of Energy and the first female governor of Michigan, Jennifer Granholm. White House National Climate Advisor, Gina McCarthy, and renowned equity thought leader and activist, Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali. And he has even more jobs than I do. Mustafa is the Vice President of Environmental Justice, Climate, and Community Revitalization for the National Wildlife Federation. He's also Interim Chief of Programs at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And he's the founder and CEO of Revitalization Strategies. And I think he's also an expert in time management. So let's welcome Mustafa as he kicks off this urgent dialogue.
Netroots family, we are incredibly blessed today because we have two amazing leaders who are going to join us for a significant conversation on the work that we still need to do and the vehicles that can help us to actually address the climate crisis, to make sure that we're creating millions of new jobs, to make sure that environmental justice is being honored and integrated into the process. And we all understand that we are right now at a transformational moment in history, where we actually get a chance to change the dynamics that have been going on, to make sure that we are addressing the climate change issues that are impacting both our country and across the planet, to also make sure that we're building wealth inside of communities that have often been unseen and unheard, and to make sure that we are also addressing many of the public health impacts that have plagued far too many communities across our country. We have with us today Secretary Jennifer Granholm, who we're looking forward to a conversation with, and my old boss and friend, Gina McCarthy, our National Climate Advisor. So if y'all don't mind, I know we've only got a short amount of time today together, and there are so many questions that folks have to be able to better support the work that's going on by the president and a number of other folks across the country. I'd like to just quickly dive in. And Secretary Granholm, I'm going to come to you first. You know, there is so much energy that communities of color, that young people, that progressives have invested in making sure that we have bold climate action and that we have the vehicles, those bills, those infrastructure bills, the Build Back Better agenda and others to be able to address many of the things that we are currently facing and embracing those sets of opportunities. And we want to give a quick shout out to the Progressive Caucus, who's been standing the line to make sure that the Build Back Better agenda is moving at an equal rate as the infrastructure bill. How do you think that's going?
Well, let's just say it is definitely worth acknowledging that the Progressive Caucus really flexed their muscle, and they had the president's back when he needed them. So from the moment that President Biden announced the Senate's bipartisan infrastructure deal, I mean, he's been really clear. He's remarkably proud of it. He's happy that folks in the Senate got it done, but he's been clear it's got to travel together with the rest of his priorities in that Build Back Better agenda. And the Progressive Caucus really kept that plan on track. The reconciliation bill is going to include very essential pieces of the president's Build Back Better agenda. He supports, let me be clear, he supports all of it. His entire administration is committed to getting both the infrastructure deal and reconciliation through. And the fact is, we totally need both. There are certainly policies in the infrastructure deal to get excited about, but alone, it is just not enough to turn the ship on climate change.
Mm-hmm. I agree completely with you. You know, it's like telling folks you got to have the right hand and the left hand. Both of those bills are incredibly important, and we can't leave either one behind. Let's begin to unpack some of this, because there may be some folks who still aren't really aware or sure about some of the elements that exist inside of the Build Back Better agenda. So I'm going to come to you, Gina. We have had lots of conversations over the years. We've traveled some roads together. And I often feel, and I know you and I have talked about this before, that folks got to see policy that reflects their needs and their views. So I'd like for us to unpack, and I'm going to pose a question to you. If I'm somebody who's in Appalachia, as an example, what would be inside of the Build Back Better agenda that would help my life to be better, that would help my family to be able to move forward? What would be some of the things that you might highlight for them?
Well, first of all, Mustafa, it's terrific to see you. And every time I do, I'm more proud of both our relationship and the work that you're doing. And I'm excited about it. Secretary Granholm, you're always an inspiration and a shot in the arm whenever I see you. It's just awesome. But Mustafa, let me get to your question, because it's an important one. I want people to understand that, yes, I'm doing climate work, and yes, this matters to President Biden, but it matters because he cares about people and he cares about communities. And so there is a wealth of opportunity in both the Build Back Better plan and the reconciliation package that are going to have a direct impact on communities, on individuals, on families, on workers, especially the commitment that the president made to environmental justice on day one, which was to make sure that our climate and clean energy investments primarily and first and foremost go to environmental justice communities. So let me just mention a few things, because I just think it's important for everybody to know that all of these investments are crafted in a way that we listen to local communities and they shape their own destiny. These are not top down, let's throw it in a bucket and see what lands. This is all work that Secretary Granholm and every cabinet member is looking at so that we can make sure that it is specifically designed with the needs of local communities. Integrated right into the decision making. So we're looking at $5 billion in environmental and climate justice block grants. This is an opportunity to make a big leap forward at looking at both how we reduce pollution, but improve public health and advance climate readiness. We are talking about better data collection. For $50 million, we're going to commit to finally getting at some of the data it needs to address cumulative impact in everything we do. We're going to move forward now, but we're going to be better prepared in the future. We're talking about getting at those damn Superfund sites that so many communities of color and low-income communities live near, so that we can start spending $10 billion to start chopping them off and bringing economic opportunities to the table. Big one, Mustafa, healthy ports. You and I know we spent lots of time recognizing that those ports are health hazards to the individuals and families living around them. We have $3.5 billion to get at these port challenges and start getting the fossil fuel emissions and pollution out of the air for those communities. We're talking about investments in new school buses. We're talking about investments in refuse trucks that are quiet and electric so that we can start getting the pollution down. We're talking about increased air quality monitoring. We're talking about reduced pollution in our schools and actually bringing cooling centers to all of our schools so that we can deal with some of the excess heat. We're talking about a greenhouse gas reduction fund that's specifically tailored to looking at greenhouse gas emissions and opportunities in disadvantaged communities. That's $27.5 billion. We're talking about solar and renewable energies and DOE building upgrades. But we're also talking about some core issues, Mustafa, that you know about. We're talking about getting the Civilian Climate Corps up and running. That is a job 1, 2, 3, and 4 in my book. We're talking about taking care of dislocated workers because we know there's a shift in energy. Let's get them back to work. And even more importantly, we're talking about some fundamental challenges like lead service lines. We have to once and for all take care of our kids and take care of our homes. So we're talking about investments of $30 billion that we want to see in lead service line replacement, as well as getting at lead in our paint and moving forward with better housing opportunities, including affordable housing that is efficient, that is healthy, and resilient to the challenge of climate change. So I should stop there, but I could go on and on. There's a healthy list, and each one of these things is really going to be an opportunity to make good on the president's promise, his Justice 40 commitment, and we're going to make sure that that commitment is met.
Can I jump in on it?
Sure.
Just because Gina is so brilliant about laying out all this stuff, and a lot of that is in the infrastructure bill, and including, for example, $27 billion to expand our transmission systems, because we have to make sure we have enough capacity on these transmission systems to get clean power from where it's generated to where it's needed. It's also going to upgrade the grid so that it's resilient, so you don't see transmission towers falling into the Mississippi River like we did after Hurricane Ida. we also want to make sure that the bid, that the infrastructure deal includes $3.5 billion for weatherization assistance, which helps to obviously cut costs for low-income households. But this is all, everything we've talked about here is in and charging stations. Don't forget charging stations.
Yeah.
We want to encourage, and we want to make sure that those charging stations are in every community, not just in the wealthier ones. That's all infrastructure. The human infrastructure piece, you asked more broadly, I think, Mustafa, about the big pieces. And just very quickly, I mean, the investments in families to reduce the cost for everyday citizens, like continuing that child tax credit that so many have seen now in their paychecks, but that's going to expire, their bank accounts, that's going to expire in December, lifted half of children out of poverty. Let's continue to do that. What about the help with childcare? We in the United States don't do that. Every other advanced nation does that. We're going to see $14,000 per family for helping families pay for childcare. What about lowering the cost of prescription drugs? What about senior citizens getting access to audio, to hearing aids, and to dental? There's so much important stuff in the human infrastructure side as well that progressives can get excited about. This is why we have to get both pieces across the finish line.
You gotta love that, right? You gotta love that.
There most definitely is. There's a lot in there, and that's the reason the folks have to continue to fight to keep that in there, so that we don't end up not being able to achieve all the things that we know are so incredibly necessary. We also got to make sure, Secretary Granholm, you being and representing, the great state of Michigan before, we know that natural infrastructure, we've got to also make sure that we're strengthening that as we're dealing with this climate crisis. But let's talk about, where things can, some additional work that needs to happen. And that is in dealing with the states and making sure that as these dollars and sets of resources move from the federal level to the state level and then to the counties and to local governments, how do we make sure that there's real accountability built in there? Because we know there are some, and hopefully there's a shrinking number of folks who haven't seen value in working on environmental justice or climate issues. So maybe, Gina, I'll go to you first, and we can begin to unpack that a bit for folks.
Yeah, Mustafa, in the design of this package, I think we had to learn some lessons from the past. And that is that there are states that even if you give them money, they won't spend it. And we need to figure out a way, and we've done it here, to try to make sure that it's our programs and our expenditures, and that we can guide those to not just give money to the states. I love states. I live in one, as we all do. But there are those that certainly haven't expended money in the way that we would think would be profitable for their own communities. And so we needed to make sure that these went to programs that did a couple of different things. One is that we direct those resources and we ensure that we're listening to communities before those resources are expended. So we're talking about a community partnership here, not a top-down approach. We're also talking about how do we make sure in the design of these expenditures that they go to programs that we're already standing up so that we're ready to spend this money. And I know that Secretary Granholm has a lot to say about that, because a lot of the resources would go to her for demonstrations and other things that are going to be essential that we actually do right. So Mustafa, we are not handing these over to states to decide whether they want to spend the money and on what. We are in a collaborative process, but in the end, we are going to be dictating those expenditures on the basis of good dialogue with states, great dialogue with communities, and we're going to spend them in a way that recognizes our commitment on environmental justice. So it's not going to be haphazard. It's not going to be all or nothing. It is going to be us keeping our finger on the dial. And we've designed these investments to be able to allow us to do that.
Senator Granholm?
I think what's important to recognize, and one of the things I didn't mention that is in that reconciliation bill, is the Clean Electricity Payment Plan. And that really incentivizes the build out of clean energy. But the kicker on it is that it is enforceable, that there are incentives, there are carrots, and there are sticks if the utilities don't build out those clean resources the way we want them. You remember, the president wants to get to 100% clean electricity by 2035. There's incentives, so many incentives in this in the reconciliation bill that allow us to get there, that we can actually monitor and reward good behavior and penalize the behavior that doesn't meet up to the standards. That's very important as well.
And Mustafa, let me just say one more thing, because, obviously I'm focusing on many of the climate pieces, but I think the entire administration, because we're doing this as a whole of government effort, we are meeting with one another and figuring how we collaborate on expending these dollars in a way that really makes these investments actually work to achieve the goals of this administration. And so I just want to be very clear that I've been sitting down with Secretary Granholm and, frankly, just about every cabinet member, asking them to take a look at those old programs and dust them off. I don't want to go by what we did before, because much of those investments did not land in the communities that need those investments the most. We cannot leave this up to old program designs. We have to make sure that we have an ability to expend this money in a way that meets the president's commitments.
Well, Gina, I appreciate that. I agree. We need a 21st century sets of solutions, and we've often been kind of dealing with 20th century vehicles to be able to do it. And that leads me to my next question. I want to dive a bit deeper into equity and justice, because I would be remiss if I didn't. We know that, as I've often said, that we cannot win on climate change if we don't win on environmental injustices, because many of the drivers are coming from those communities. And whether we're talking about communities like in Flint or Benton Harbor, Michigan, or in Cancer Alley in Louisiana, or the Manchester community in Houston, Texas, we have to be really intentional about, as Gina was just sharing, about actually driving resources into those communities. Can you all talk just a little bit more about how we're making sure that there's real intentionality in the steps that we're doing and how folks are being pulled into the process? I'll go to you, Secretary Granholm.
Yeah, I think the most important direction comes from the president, comes from the top. And what he has said, and he has signed executive orders on this, is that he's instructed all of government to ensure that 40% of the benefits of the investments go to communities that are frontline communities, communities that have been left behind, communities that have often been unseen. And so now the administration is focused on making sure we have the right communities identified. This is happening, I know, at CEQ. It's certainly happening at DOE, because we are going to see, we hope, a slug of investment opportunities through these reconciliation and the infrastructure bill. But we have to make sure that it goes to the places that need those investments most. And that's what EJ 40, Environmental Justice 40, is all about. I know Gina's got a bigger lens on what the rest of the cabinet is doing, the rest of the departments are doing, but I can just tell you, at the Department of Energy, we have a huge focus on this. We've created an Office of Place-Based Strategies. We have an advisor for equity that has a whole office that is focused on making sure even that existing investments now are being directed to places where we need them most. So this effort is an ongoing effort from the start of this administration, but it will be put on steroids when we have more resources to be able to correct what has the systemic racism of the past. Gina?
Can I just add to what the Secretary said at the very end? Let's acknowledge that there's nothing haphazard about the challenges we're facing. No, they are systemic. They are systemic disinvestments. And so what we need to do is exactly what President Biden is doing, which is being intentional. We are going to systemically invest. we are going to make sure that that gets done. And part of that is recognizing that we have to open the door to communities early on in the process. Mustafi, I'm sure you know this because you participated so much in the work at EPA, but you know, we have a White House Council on Environmental Justice now. They are not sitting by wondering what we're going to do. They are sitting there representing their communities. We have a program that Secretary Granholm helps to run, which is run out of DOE, and we work on it and others, but it's about workforce, and it's about making sure that workers in transition have a place to land. You know, you mentioned that you've lived in Appalachia. We cannot treat climate change challenges as if the only thing we need to worry about is how much greenhouse gas emissions there are. We need to worry about the human beings that are being impacted now, where there's a transition. We want to be able to celebrate that transition, and the only way we can do it is to make sure that we're not leaving communities and workers behind. This is a robust program, not a sideline issue for all of us. This is what Justice 40 actually means. And, you know, I'm just incredibly proud of the framing, frankly, that President Biden has put on this issue, because he's never talked to people about how we have to sacrifice, how we have to do more for less. He's talked about doing these as investments, not payments. He knows that we're investing not just in our future from a climate perspective, but we're investing in our economic future. We're lifting communities that deserve to be lifted. They deserved it all along, and now they're going to see that lift. And I think it's incredibly important to remember that this is about job growth. This is about grabbing the 21st century. As Jennifer mentioned, from the CARE work that we're trying to get through in investments, we are just so low on the totem pole compared to other countries similarly situated in terms of how we invest in our people, how we invest in our infrastructure. You know, that has to stop. And I think the buck stops with these two bills moving forward.
I agree. And thank you for talking about jobs. You know that we are definitely going to create millions of new jobs. I mean, that goes without saying. Secretary Granholm, you know, when I'm out across the country talking about these new sets of opportunities in the climate economy, I'm also very aware that less than 2% of the businesses that are owned in that space are owned by African-American, Latinx, and Indigenous brothers and sisters. How do we help to make sure that as this new set of economic opportunities grows, that it is actually also proportionate to the amount of folks of color that we have in our country?
Super important point. Thank you, Mustafa. I mean, not only is there this massive gap in business ownership, I mean, too often clean energy projects, as Gina alluded to, just skip over the communities that need them the most, from those who've carried the weight of energy extraction for generations, to those who are hit first and worst by the impacts of climate change, to those who've got to spend way too much of their paycheck to be able to afford their energy bills. So DOE, I can tell you, we are committed to correcting these inequities. That's why a few weeks ago, for example, we launched Communities Leap, which is a new initiative to support locally driven clean energy solutions. And that means businesses too, in communities that are experiencing environmental injustice or climate impacts, or, you know, stress from the shift away from fossil fuels. It's why we announced what did we announce? We announced $15 million in May for solar deployment in underserved communities, another opportunity for businesses. We awarded $12 million in July to tribal communities for projects that are going to lower their energy costs and increase their energy resilience. The Loan Programs Office in the Department of Energy is back in business, $40 billion in loan authority. And I just have to say a word about that, because in 2020, they received 3 applications for loans and they didn't hand out 1 cent. And in May of this year alone, they got 3 applications a week, and essentially every month now, they're reviewing pitches for projects that collectively are worth $7 billion. And our priority is to get money out the door and into the hands of people of color, people with big ideas, people who can lead the way in their communities in clean energy. So we've waived all of the upfront fees for those, and we've sped up the approval process so it's more accessible for small and minority-owned businesses. And at the same time, we're really working to expand the pipeline for STEM and support a new generation of clean energy entrepreneurs that look like America. So for example, last week we announced a $2.5 million prize for innovators in communities that have been historically underserved by climate and energy funding. And finally, let me just note this, because this is an important piece of the equation. We have an office now of energy jobs, and it's focused on creating good paying union jobs in clean energy. And they're also looking at how project labor agreements can include targeted hiring goals. So clean energy projects will prioritize women, businesses, workers of color, LGBTQ workers, et cetera. So we are, as Gina said, we're intentionally investing rather than disinvesting. And that includes for businesses and entrepreneurs of color.
Mm-hmm. And we've got to also focus on our contracting and subcontracting opportunities. Totally. The federal government has lots of authority in that space.
I know. Can I just add one thing, and I'll try to be really short. You mentioned this a little bit, but we have a new federal sustainability office that's really focused on how we spend our money at the federal level. And you're right, it goes all the way to contracts. And if you look at the investments that are in these packages, many of them, if they relate to workers, then we want to make sure the money goes to unions or workers that have access to a union. We are not simply giving this money out with a wing and a prayer that someone may pay attention to the workers. We're intentionally making sure that workers' rights are considered and that there are opportunities for good paying jobs in every step of the way. But let me just again reiterate the CCC, the Civilian Climate Corps. This in addition to the workforce efforts that Secretary Granholm has underway, which is terrific, to deal with transitional workers. The Civilian Climate Corps is going to be married with labor unions that are going to give opportunities for training so that by the end of your time in the Civilian Climate Corps, you have an ability to get a job. You know, you've learned a skill set. This is enormously important when we have so many needs to fill for jobs, and young people need to have, and even old people that might actually join, like me. This is a real opportunity for us, I think, to rethink how we bring workers in, how small business owners can transition and have those be people of color that can actually learn how to run a business in a way that's going to be engaging and exciting and collaborative. I'm sorry, I said I'd just say a few things. I'm shutting up now.
That's all right. We always love hearing from you. I agree. It's an opportunity to address the wealth gap that exists inside of our country and to help prepare folks for careers, not just jobs, but careers moving forward. Secretary Granholm, as I move to this last question, you know, we have to call out the fact that we've got so many different challenges that are still happening. You know, from the climate crisis, we know everything from hurricanes and floods to wildfires. We see, you know, some of the lead issues that are still going on. I call out Benton Harbor again, and a number of other locations across our country. In dealing with all of these challenging situations, how do you stay optimistic about both what we're doing in the moment and the future? And as you finish up, then I want to go to Gina also for the same question.
All right. Well, let me just quickly say I am optimistic And I'm even more hopeful. I'm not just expecting that everything's going to work out, but I have this great hope that we're going to meet this challenge because I see this progress every single day. We've got some of the smartest and hardest working people in the world at the Department of Energy, and they're dedicating all of their waking hours to overcoming the obstacles, the technical obstacles that are in our way. Our national labs, for example, they're developing this way cool, cutting edge technologies. Our staff are working with communities across the country every day on these issues, not to mention all of the passionate advocates who I meet who are getting into their communities to embrace, clean energy. And so I remind myself how far we have come. Less than a decade ago, fossil fuels were still way more expensive. Way cheaper. Clean energy was way more expensive. Fossil fuels was way cheaper. And now solar and wind increasingly outcompete fossil fuels. And every year we're setting a new record for renewable energy capacity that's installed. And even the private sector has taken notice. And we've got America's automakers and airlines that are working to switch to clean energy faster than we ever thought possible. We know the economics make sense. We know the technology makes sense. We got an administration that is laser focused on enacting these policies that are going to put it all together. The window's open for big, bold federal climate action in Congress. What's on the table is the largest investment in clean energy and climate resilience and in communities in history. The jobs of the future are in clean energy. This president is committed to making sure those jobs are here in America and that they're in the communities that should be first in line. So all I can say is the way I look at it, we are all of us are so lucky to be where we are at this moment in time. And it is just a privilege to help make it happen.
Well, thank you for that. Gina, as we break our addiction to fossil fuels, as we continue with many of the pipeline fights that are going on, as we move forward on a just transition and helping to make sure that no one is left behind and that we've got this new set of jobs, what are you optimistic about? What is your vision as we move forward?
What makes me really optimistic is that I feel like for the first time in my lifetime, and it's longer than anybody else's on this call, I think the diversity of our community and the voices that we're hearing will make all the difference in the world. We are listening. And that's what government needs to do. And every time I look at President Biden, that was rude. President Biden, I just look at him as being a people person, somebody like me who believes in government working for the people. We've spent 4 years in what I would call a miserable state of looking at what less things we can do in government to help people. And we've made a tremendous step forward. And we have to keep moving forward. And I get to work with crazy, energetic human beings like Jennifer Granholm. And that's what really keeps me excited and hopeful and energetic and youthful.
Well, thank you, Secretary Jennifer Granholm. Thank you, Gina McCarthy, our National Climate Advisor. I would remind the Netroots family of something that my grandmother shared with me when I was a young boy, that we have power unless we give it away. We have to utilize our power to push, to make sure that the things that we know are necessary are there, that we're holding people accountable, because holding people accountable helps them to be able to achieve the goals that we all need. And I'll close with a quote from Dr. King, that we come to these shores in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. We're in this boat knowing that the climate crisis is real and we have to address it, but that we have the tools and abilities to make real change happen if we are honoring the voices of frontline communities, if we're honoring the voices of young people, and if we're also honoring the voices of progressive individuals who are doing everything that they can to make us have a better, more sustainable and healthy future. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in and continue the journey here with Netroots.